is Bill Anderson. I work in the Economics division at BOEM, and today I'm going to be talking about the fiscal terms that will apply to the future lessee. So this is a presentation kind of picking up after the auction has concluded. And the next presentation, again, we're going to get more into the weeds as far as the auction itself goes. But the auction has ended. We've picked a provisional winner, and moving forward with the lessee. Here we go. So here's an overview of the fiscal terms I'm going to be talking about today. The annual rent is a particular payment that's associated with the proposed lease area itself. The annual project easement rent is a payment that's associated with the transmission cable to support the project. Once there's electrical generation at the site, we'll transition over to away from an annual rent payment toward an annual operating fee. And then finally, Wright mentioned it briefly, but there are some various junctures where we have financial assurance requirements. So beginning first with the annual rental payment, BOEM uses an annual rental rate of $3 per acre, and we've identified the proposed lease area of Kitty Hawk as 122,405 acres. So the simple math there, multiplying that acreage by the rental rate of $3 per acre, we wind up with a rental payment of about $367,000. So the first rental payment here for the lessee will be due within 45 days of the lessee receiving the lease, and then subsequent rental payments will be made on the lease anniversary. And the rental payments can be adjusted for various reasons. One of them being whether or not acreage has been relinquished. So if a developer doesn't envision a particular portion of a lease within their development plans, then they could decide to get rid of that particular acreage, and it would reduce the rental payment. Additionally, if a developer plans to install a project over time in various phases, they would only the rental payment would only apply to the portion of the site that's not undergoing or doesn't have electrical generation on it. Moving on to the annual project easement rent. This is a payment, as I mentioned, that's associated with the transmission cable that will be needed to support the project. So the provisional winner and future lessee will be entitled to a project easement with their lease that guarantees them access, I guess, to the larger electrical grid, and there will be a rent associated with that particular area. It's a 200-foot wide zone where the transmission cable would be centered on, and the rent payment that's associated with this particular project easement rent is calculated on the basis of $70 per statute mile, and that's multiplied by the number of statute miles that would basically the cable would traverse over federal waters. And this payment is structured a little bit differently in terms of when it starts than the annual rental payment on the lease area. Rather, this one doesn't begin until the approval of the construction and operations plan, which is really the time when I guess the exact location and specifications for that will have been due. So we'll hold off in calculating that until those plans have been identified and approved. The subsequent payments will be on the lease anniversary, and they'll continue until the lease itself terminates. And if any additional project easements are required to, say, support something like an offshore substation that isn't within the proposed lease area, additional areas can be acquired, and there's a rental rate associated with those particular areas, and it's calculated on the basis of either $5 per acre or $450 per year, whichever is greater. So kind of transitioning over to the annual operating fee, essentially once a project has been fully built out to the specifications in the construction and operations plan, the lessee will transition away from paying the annual rent payment that's associated with the lease area itself, and they'll transition toward the annual operating fee. So this is a summary of what the operating fee is and how it's calculated, and then I'm going to go through the individual components of it in the forthcoming slides. So it's the anticipated annual power output. It's valued at a regional wholesale power price, something I'm going to get into later about. We're looking for feedback here in this PSN comment period. And then finally, that's multiplied by an operating fee rate that's set by BOEM. So here's the formula on the right-hand side. There are 5 terms here that are used in the calculation. The nameplate capacity of the project, the number of hours in a year, a capacity factor, a power price, and finally the operating fee rate. Starting with the first 2 terms, we have nameplate capacity. This will be the planned available capacity that's been approved in the construction and operations plan. And when multiplied by the number of hours in a year, we arrive at continuous full power operation value in megawatt hours. Incorporating the next term, capacity factor, we know that the wind isn't going to be blowing 100% of the time. It's an intermittent resource, and for a few other reasons, there's a reason to adjust those first 2 terms by capacity factor. And with that adjustment, we get the anticipated annual power output of a project. In the proposed sale notice, we've identified this capacity factor as 0.4 for the first 6 years of commercial operations. And this particular capacity factor can be adjusted over time as electrical generation data comes in. The 4th term here, adding that in, we get the estimated market value of the electricity. For this particular power price, we use something that's publicly available, an index, and reflects regional or market conditions. And what we've identified here in the PSN for a proposed power price for this particular lease area is a PJM Dominion hub. So far for our other lease areas, we've had an easier time identifying price hubs for the Northeast, but the markets in the Southeast here are a little bit different. We're kind of in a transitional zone between regulated and non-regulated markets. And this is something that we're really keen to get kind of the localized knowledge and expertise as to whether this is the right price or if there are other publicly available prices that would offer a better valuation of the electrical prices in the area. Finally, including the last term in here is the operating fee rate, and this reflects the share of the estimated market value of the electricity. This particular rate is set by BOEM, and it's been set at 2% for the life of commercial operations. And as I mentioned, it reflects the value of the power payable to the lessor on behalf of the larger public. Here I've sort of included a very stylized example of an operating fee payment calculation, sort of a static one-time payment. I've substituted a project, the nameplate capacity, and identified it as 500 megawatts, and a power price of $40 per megawatt hour. And plugging, through the math here, we get an annual operating fee of approximately $1.4 million for a project that's been fully built out and operating. Okay, and just to wrap up the annual operating fee rate, it's actually the first payment is due within 45 days of commercial operations. So it's basically in advance of the full year of commercial generation. And then subsequent payments are due annually on or before each of the lease anniversary. And finally, there are various financial assurance requirements. The first one applying to the provisional winner. So prior to lease issuance and execution of the actual lease, BOEM requires a $100,000 in initial financial assurance, typically in the form of a bond or other approved form of financial assurance, and we have those detailed in our regulations. I'm not a financial assurance expert, but if this is a topic that interests you, we can point you to the right person on our team. Additionally, there's supplemental bonding that's required at different junctures, along with the approval of the site assessment plan, the approval of the construction operations plan, as well as for the decommissioning of the site in the future. And the estimates for the financial assurance are determined in the future based on cost estimates. So this wraps up my presentation here. Happy to take any questions or comments.